think that's working. I think we can just get started. There's probably some people that'll trickle in that I'll let in as we go. Put it on speaker view. So yeah, we'll just get right into it. It is so nice to have you all here, especially our panelists who took the time out of their crazy busy schedules to be here. I'm super excited. My name is Annabelle Gregg. I'm the Executive Director of the Water Insecurity Correction Coalition. And just since we're pretty new and you guys probably don't know who we are, we're a small organization based in upstate New York that aims to encourage community connection, foster youth leadership, and help raise awareness of America's water insecurity crisis. So I thought this would be a great idea to host a whole bunch of different perspectives to talk about this really important issue of systemic racism and how it influences water insecurity in the United States. And I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, which might be a little tricky. Also, I'll just remind you guys to mute yourselves if you're not a panelist, just because there's like background noise and stuff. If that would be okay. But anyway, so I'll have our awesome panelists introduce themselves. Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Scott. I'm the Executive Chairman for the National Clean Water Collective. To date, we've raised over $475,000 worth of support for the Flint community. We've also supported Bahamas and Newark. And our goal is to provide water support, support and relief to people experiencing water crisis, whether it's emergency support or long-term solutions. Thanks for having me, Annabelle.
Thanks for being here. Anthony, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Anthony Diaz. I'm one of the co-founders of the Newark Water Coalition. I guess our claim to fame would be the Video Music Award protest. We've done a lot of great work in the community, just educating, empowering folks. We're actually moving not only, what's great about this panel real quick is just that we're also moving into like police brutality issues and mutual sustainability and mutual aid groups as well. So in COVID, we're doing no contact home deliveries of water to families that request it.
Awesome. You guys are doing great work. Mila, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Mila Marshall. I am a doctoral candidate at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and my focus is on urban ecology. I'm very interested in food systems and social justice and understanding urban form and function in terms of segregation and sustainability. And I'm here in my capacity as research associate at the UIC Freshwater Lab, which is a project program that helps undergraduate students connect their humanities degrees to issues of water. My most, I'm sorry, can everyone make sure that you mute yourselves, please? Thank you.
Anyone, please mute themselves if they're not a panelist. Sorry. Go ahead, Mila.
So I work on the intersection between science and policy, and I do consider myself an academic ally, because if we don't answer or we don't ask the right questions, we don't create information that's usable for decision makers. After the Flint water crisis, I worked with my colleagues to do a conference called Untroubled Waters, Cities, Race, and Great Lakes, where we brought mayors of color and mayors of cities that were predominantly of color, African-American cities, to the UIC campus to talk about very high level what were some of the patterns they were seeing about water for their respective communities. So I'm very interested in research on water, as well as water advocacy for fresh water, as well as recreation for African Americans. And I'm so very happy to be here. And thank you for the invitation, Annabelle.
Thanks for being here. Hope, do you want to go next?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm on my phone. I don't have a special mic or anything. But my name is Hope Cupid. I'm the CEO of Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project. We like to call ourselves SERCAP. I've been with the organization for 13 years. We primarily started because communities around us lacked access to clean drinking water and indoor plumbing. So we've been around for 52 years. And SERCAP's mission is to help folks that don't have access to clean drinking water. And we advocate and stand with communities for many, many years to make sure that they can get that. We provide training, technical assistance, any financial assistance, primarily to address water, wastewater, solid waste, community development, and housing needs. We are in 7 states, from Delaware to Florida, so we have a big footprint. However, we are a part of a larger network called the RCAP network. There's 6 RCAPs in the country, and I'm happy to be one. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Hope. And then last but not least, Kevin, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Sofin, and I am the founder of an organization called Wristponsible. Wristponsible buys and sells these arts and craft wristbands, and then I reinvest the profits into grassroots water projects. I'm a big believer that to actually build empowerment, you must first understand the problem, reverse engineer a solution, and then implement it. And I've had the fortune of working actually with both Sierra and Anthony on this call, but particularly within Flint, we've done a lot of work with implementing long-term point of entry water treatment systems. So a lot of empowerment building to enable not just sort of Band-Aid solutions, but long-term solutions. And we've also done a range of water projects around the world in Nepal, Tanzania, Guatemala, Chile. And our goal is to continue to raise funds and awareness to implement grassroots water projects. And I'm excited to dive into this and explore all the opportunities with all of you, and particularly here in North America.
Awesome. Thanks so much. You guys are all amazing, and I'm super honored to have you guys here today for this really important conversation. So I guess we'll just jump right into it. So Mila, I'll ask you this first question as a little introduction. Can you explain to us what environmental racism is?
Sure. I think I want to start off with helping, I'm a bit engaging on Zoom, and since we have this technology, just by a thumbs up or using your button on Zoom, how many of you have ever heard the term environmental racism? Raise your hand or give me a thumbs up, all right? So we have pretty much, all right, so I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, right? So in the chat box, what is it that you understand about environmental racism? And I will share my comments as you communicate. What is it that you understand about environmental racism? And I'll give you a few moments to share a bit. It could be in a few words. So we have overbearing pollutants in low-income communities, companies dumping bad stuff into areas not being held. Okay, so these are actions, all right? There's something very specific about environmental racism. People of color bear the brunt of problems. Okay, thank you. So environmental racism is a concept within environmental injustice or environmental justice. And sometimes we use those terms interchangeably. I often have to help people understand how racism permeates through all aspects of Black lives. And people seem to think that it doesn't permeate through every single aspect of our lives. Education, housing, transportation, reproductive health, and the environment, and every single natural resource in the environment as well. Water, air, land, food. So it's interesting how it is people believe that racism is this thing that happens on its own without understanding the fact that environmental racism is conceptually the racialized context of how practices and policies are implemented relative to the environment, which can equal not just the siting of an industrial infrastructure, but also the method in which the decision was made and who was included and excluded. This also relates to access to green space in terms of there's something called restoration justice and how landscapes and natural areas are invested into in some areas as priorities and not others. So environmental racism permeates through the environmental sector and creates this disparity between low-income communities and affluent communities, but primarily for African Americans, immigrant communities, brown communities, we are disproportionately burdened with the disamenities of cities and of the market. So if you think about where industrial corridors are sited, if you think about whose land is taken first for development, if you think about whose water is protected first, you'll see that African Americans, as well as other communities of color, typically are the ones with less agency and end up with the poorest quality environment, poorest air quality, poorest water, and other resources as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great introduction to such a broad problem. And that kind of brings us to our next question, which is for Sierra. What role has racism played in the Flint water crisis and its longevity?
Oh, I mean, it's played a huge role. I mean, if you understand the statistics there, 40% or more than 40% of the people that live in Flint live below the poverty line. And in fact, I just got off a call where we talked about how, Black and brown people primarily, and, there was a woman that was a white Caucasian woman. She talked about it affecting the poor, but it's affecting them in so many ways, so where they don't have access to getting the basic needs like water, and it's unfortunate. And so, when you're talking, and even just to get the education, because we talked about ways to educate the public, we were talking about, on the legal side of it, how can people learn about this? And some people don't even have, phones or, even access to internet to be a part of these sorts of conversations, to even understand, just how to go about getting support and getting the necessary, just everything that they need to be compensated for their harm. And so, it's affected Flint residents in so many ways. And, for us, one of the things that we're continuing to do is educate folks. If it's going out on the ground, being, a grassroots organization, that's important for us. And, now that COVID is hit, we actually work with individuals on the ground, and we send them promotional information or promotional materials so they can educate the public. But, this whole thing, it's affecting Black and brown people in a major way, especially with the Latinos. Like, we gave out water to the Latin community, and some of them are scared to get it because they don't want to be reported to ICE. And so they don't come out to events. And so, but what happens is they're forced to drink the water in the community, and then they end up getting sick from it. So it's it's a tough situation, but we've got to be able to bridge the gap somehow to so that everyone that's in need of help can get that help and support.
Yeah, I think education and raising awareness is like number one thing. And that kind of brings us to Anthony and this question for him. How you and your organization, the Newark Water Coalition, just put together the Mutual Aid March, which was kind of in conjunction with the thousands of protests across the country that came as a result of George Floyd's death. So could you tell us a little bit about your experiences during that march and your takeaways from it?
So, thank you very much. And definitely shout outs to Kevin, who was a huge part of that. We had 4 pallets of water that was distributed out to the city of Newark. So definitely shout outs to you, Kevin. So obviously everyone's upset, everyone's angry, and that's why you go to these protests, to draw on this collective energy. You want to get your frustrations out, and you want to do something meaningful, but be a part of a group. And so, a community resident reached out to the Newark Water Coalition because of our VMA protests, and they said, I'm not an activist, but I'm angry, I'm upset, I know this is what you do, can you help me? And that's how this all started. And so, I like to do things a little bit differently. I like to have a lot of political education around my actions, and also give people next steps, right? It's not enough to march anymore. It's not enough to make these demands. It's not enough to register people to vote. People want more. So, I chose a spot in Newark that wasn't, in the traditional areas where people usually march downtown in the local business district. I wanted it in the community. I wanted it from a high school to a police precinct that is brand spanking new. The building's like $150 million building. And then, you see the schools they're not that nice, right? They're not that new. They haven't been renovated in years and all of this. So it was a real tangible representation of the school to prison pipeline, right? So we understand incidences like George Floyd don't start you know, at this level, they start when you're very young. You know, Black and brown bodies are institutionalized very, very young. And so that was the first level of it. And then the second level is, well, if we're going to get all these people together, it's not enough to march anymore. If we're in a community, let's be a blessing to that community. And that's where the mutual aid aspect showed up. And so if you're not familiar with mutual aid in the time of COVID, it's an oversimplification is communities showing up for communities. So we've gotten resources. If your neighbor needs groceries, you know, we'll have it pull from a different source to be able to provide for that resident. So I wanted to do that as we're marching. So in the very beginning of the protest, you had just so many people with lettuce in one hand, a box of water, diapers, and as we're marching along to the precinct, we're giving this out. Now, I can't tell you like everybody in the community was happy because obviously we're in their community disrupting, but the look of appreciation on a mother's face, which diapers are really expensive. They are really, really expensive. Was just joy and appreciation. And like, it was thank you, right? And that's what I wanted people to get out of it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go all the way to the precinct, but we had already set up a distribution site at the precinct. So we gave out like 95% of our donations were given out already. The goal was to set up this site and have the marchers meet up and all be together, but it didn't work out like that because we were met with paid agitators. Literally, the city of Newark officials came and disrupted our protest physically. And people are like, well, why? This doesn't make any sense. Well, the work of the Newark Water Coalition has been very, the narrative that, or yeah, I would say the narrative and story that we're selling or telling folks that is based on real life science is very different than what the city administration is saying. And because we've been in a thorn in the side of the city for the last 2 years, they just really don't like anything that we do. And it was very disappointing because at the end of the day, the community is the one that suffers. Right. And I really, really have tried very hard to make this not a Newark Water Coalition and Anthony Diaz versus, you know, Ras Baraka, the mayor, and the city of Newark. Because all I care about is getting the residents of Newark clean water and empowering them to be able to advocate for themselves, not only on this issue, but every issue. And we see why that's so important right now, right? I always say this, and I'll end up with this because I can go forever, is that all struggles are interconnected.
Yes, Sarah.
All struggles are interconnected. Thank you.
It's kind of like what you reminded me really quick is, you know, that whole thing in Africa and how, you know, what they've set up is kind of like a dependency on, you know, people to help Africa, but Africa already has so many resources, and that's what they call toxic charity. When you're, you know, it's like when you have a baby, you know, you raise the baby and then after a while you let them go. But what's happening in places like Newark and even Flint and Africa is that we're making them dependent instead of empowering them to feel like they can do it on their own. And so what you talked about is important. It is important for us to empower people in different communities that are suffering to let them know that they can then, we can pass the torch to them and they can lead their own community.
Yeah, and on that, there's one documentary that would be really good that I recommend everyone to watch. It's called Capitalism, and it really dives into Haiti. And unfortunately, Haiti is like just a breeding ground for charities that and when I watched this, I kind of thought about like, what's the point of charity? And in my mind, the point of charity is to not exist anymore. And ideally, when you're trying to ultimately support a community, like Sarah said and Anthony mentioned, like, you want to build empowerment. You don't want to have to continuously have to be supporting and giving handouts. No one wants to have to be continuously rely on the outside. So, and the question here is, it's not, unfortunately, we can't just point to one thing. Like in Flint, Newark, for example, yeah, there's lead in the water. Oh, easy solution. Just replace all the pipes. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. And it wasn't just one, isn't the main reason that's contributing to the problem. But I think back to the point of the whole disaster capitalism, where it's good to help and you want to help, but you need to actually think about what you're trying to do. And when you're trying to help, the end goal should be, how can I ultimately be eliminated? And how can we allow them, whoever the community is, to be self-sufficient to where it's not modern day colonialization, it's instead empowerment, just whatever the whole, not giving them a fish, but teaching them how to fish.
Yeah.
I think what was striking for me, Anthony, in your comments, if I can just quickly before we move on, is this how we talk about the city, right? As if the city is not made up of our neighbors and people who live with us. But that, like, it's unfortunate that as Black people, the political infrastructure that's supposed to be available for democracy to be enacted does not work for us, right? So the fact that we cannot use legislation, or when we speak up, when people in Flint spoke up, because of the color of their skin, they weren't listened to, right? They had to have so many people stand in the gap and stand up for them from outside of Michigan, scholars, from external, from their city, from their state, to come in and hold someone accountable. And why is that? Why is that we constantly need an ally to translate for us when you live in our cities? You too suffer in some way. And this is the unfortunate reality of segregation. When a white person is raised in the same city as a Black person, and everywhere that white person goes is high quality, they can't even fathom a global city allowing some sort of contamination or toxins to exist in that system. So when you try and present them with, this is happening in your city, it's a lot of, are you sure? Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. No, it's uninformed decision makers also that look like us. Environmental literacy and environmental knowledge is extremely low. People who have never worked in the environmental sector making decisions about natural resources and not understanding that monetizing nature and pitting people against nature always will result in Black and brown people being harmed in order to save a buck or make a buck. And there's so many examples of how it is environmental racism and environmental injustice has caused harm to a larger scale, at a larger scale. The Great Lakes is the one place on the face of the earth where environmental racism should not be tolerated simply because 10% of America's population lives in the Great Lakes.
Water, yes.
So the only reason why that water is thick is because of the color of the skin of the people who live next to it. And we can't even advocate for the water because we're trying to advocate for officers to stop killing us.
So we're dealing with crises upon crises upon crises, including COVID.
Absolutely.
I think for me, Anthony, just to hear you say and what resonates with me, and Mala touched on it, that the officials just don't like you. You're a troublemaker. You're labeled as a troublemaker, so to speak, but you're trying to bring justice and trying to move forward. And I often see in the work that I do, if I don't have a white ally, I can't move forward. I mean, that is really, and that's on a personal note. I know we're talking about this, you know, but dealing with things that I'm trying to do in my community, I need to have someone else to help push what I need. So that really struck with me when you said that, Anthony. And I'm glad that, and all of you are young. I'm glad to see all of you doing this and keeping going, because I've been around for a long, long time, and just to see this, it just, you know, it makes me very upset.
Well, it's not just environmental issues, it's across the board that we've always had to have a white ally to get us to where we want to get. That's just a common theme that's unfortunately happening within our community. It's been happening for many, many years. But I'll person speak.
I don't even know what to say other than thank you. Those are amazing responses. Anthony, thank you for putting together that march in the first place. It's inspiring to hear about it. Same with all of your responses. So this next question is for Hope. A big contributing factor of water insecurity in the United States is government neglect, whether that be local, state, or national. In response to this, your organization, SERCAP, has encouraged communities themselves, like Roanoke, Virginia, to take developing new water projects into their own hands. Can you tell us a little bit about SERCAP's philosophy and method and how you think it ties into systemic racism and water insecurity?
So yes, and thanks again for having me, Annabelle. Thanks for putting this together. I want to let everyone first off know SERCAP's mission. Our mission is to improve the quality of life for low-income individuals by promoting affordable water and wastewater facilities, community development, environmental health, and economic self-sufficiency. We actually was an organization that started out helping folks in Hollins, Virginia that did not have access to water. So when we speak of neglect, let us just say what it is. There's very little investment in infrastructure. And why is that? Well, you know, folks tend to put things to the back burner that they can't see. And the things that I'm referring to is our water. It's underground. No one sees it or notices it until there's an issue. But right now, there is a bill in the Senate that may give us all some hope. It's Senate Bill 3591. Check that out. I'll highlight a little bit of the purpose of that bill. For starters, the purpose of the bill is to provide for improvements to the rivers and harbors of the United States, also to provide for conservation and development of water and related resources. And lastly, but not least in the bill, is to provide for water pollution control activities. These are just a few items mentioned in the bill. But look, I want to highlight how they're listed. To me, this is the priority. The first thing, rivers. The second thing, conservation and development. The last thing is water pollution. Now, I don't know if that's ironic, but it just struck me as ironic that it's listed that way. This bill is in the works, and it was set out in May of this year. So please, you know, check that out and see how you can help advocate and move that bill along. Now about SERCAP's philosophy. It is SERCAP's philosophy to continue to improve operations and secure water resources for people striving to gain access to water within their communities. We want to achieve this by making sure water is affordable. Water rates in some parts of our country are just not affordable. We have 7 states, from Delaware to Florida, and I can tell you how much water is. It ranges from $35 a month to $150 a month, or even more. I had one client call us, their water bill was $700 for 1 month. They cannot afford that.
And that's in Virginia?
Sir, ma'am?
That's in Virginia?
That was actually in South Carolina.
South Carolina. Oh, yes, I did hear about South Carolina.
Yeah. And so, and we want to, you know, for our method, we want to achieve this by making sure water is affordable. That's a basic human right. And no one should have to worry about paying for water when you have so many other things to pay for. We provide our communities with technical and training assistance. When we first started our work, this technical and training assistance was provided by surveying rural communities, because that's our focus. We work in rural areas. So we wanted to learn, you know, what was the most pressing needs of those low-income residents, and what was the main need that they needed. Overwhelmingly, our survey came back, they needed access to water. And this was in the 60s and 70s. So at that time, low-income families in Roanoke, Virginia, were hauling water from contaminated creeks and springs. They were catching water in buckets and using that to drink, or they were just, you know, at the time going to the general store and buying water in pop bottles. So our workers identified at least over 500 low-income families from whom access to safe drinking water was a critical issue. And we started our program to help low-income families in the area gain access to safe water. So during that period, from about a 5-year period from 1970 to 1975, we helped 10 water systems in rural communities just used by a simple method. We helped communities in need of assistance and where they identified that assistance, and we got groups together of residents to get organized and to address their own water problems. We helped these communities to develop water projects, including obtaining financing and gathering essential official approval. And our main funder is USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services. That's where we get our funding to help us do our work.
Wow.
Now, I'm glad that we get that funding, but we need donations as well to help us to continue, because some people that we help fall outside of the income guidelines. So there are people out there that what we would consider by definition wealthy, but they still need help with getting access to water. So note that I said that this started back in the 70s. Has anything changed? Well, I just want to let you guys know a community that we have worked for many decades in Delaware just got access to water last year, 2019. So why is that? Because the people that sit on their boards have now died off. They have new leaders who have emerged who are more open to providing services to low-income minority populations. The community was denied water for several decades. They finally got a referendum to put water in place. Systematic racism comes into play with these folks. This is what we hear when we say, well, you know, this community wants access to water. Things are often cited to us. These are excuses. Well, they won't pay their water bill. Why should we give them water? We're going to have bills that are not paid and we can't collect and cover our costs. Or the other excuse is they were just putting in the water lines. It's just too much. We cannot afford that as a municipality or as a system. So systematic racism creates disparities in so many ways. And Mallory talked about that in housing, yes, and even in water. So these systems of racism must be broken down. Everyone in this country should have access to clean and affordable drinking water, especially now since we all know we need to wash our hands.
Of course.
Some people that don't have clean water are afraid to even wash their hands, even during this pandemic. And that's what we need to keep ourselves safe. And I believe Ala mentioned that 40%, or Sarah, I think, 40% of the U.S. population still drinks water from unsafe systems. That is true. Black and brown communities face an increased risk of exposure to unsafe water. That is no surprise. And some locations in our country, with the largest population of low-income people, Black and brown folks, non-native English-speaking residents, live with the most egregious health violations and contaminations in their communities. I call this group the Disinvested People, meaning that it is hard to get investments in their communities, or the community has been stripped of its wealth. So let's check this out. If we know that 40% of our communities have high violations or chronic non-compliance with water issues, guess who lives in those communities? They also have the highest racial, ethnic, and language vulnerability compared to localities with the lowest racial, ethnic, and language vulnerability, without saying people that are not people of color. So we need to think about that as our nation is moving forward past this and becoming more aware of the disparities. Now, there is a clear example of systems in place that show despair and perpetuate systems that create and continue to maintain racial inequality. We need change. We need to redo the structures of structural racism. Laws that should be equal are not equal to all.
I just wanted to say, to your point, it's almost as though people don't understand the interconnectedness of policies from various sectors, right? So how we even approach water is very fragmented. So if you think about the average person in Chicago doesn't even understand what it means to be inland coastal. I don't even know if people have even heard that or if people understand what that means. The other thing is we have so much water that somebody mentioned earlier, like people don't know the problems with water until it's a problem for them. So the problems that people have been experiencing, for example, here in Chicago, have been related to flooding, and it's very seasonal. So you're aware of water issues only when you flood. Why? Because that's your relationship to, to water. If you're a renter and you don't pay water, you're not even aware of how it is water is priced because it's included in your rent. So there are all these factors that contribute to why a Black person or a brown person may not understand how to advocate for themselves. But then also what concerns me, and I'm glad you brought it up, you talked about your funding from USDA. How is it that you have the food justice movement, right? Food sovereignty, food sustainability. Those individuals within that community, and I belong to it, don't necessarily talk about water until it is water that they need to pay for to grow their food. But they're not water advocates for water for the system. So how we conceptualize all of these issues makes it like, it's very fragmented. So my hopes is that we understand the intersectionality of water. And I'm thinking, like, if I was a homeowner, and here we are trying to get Black and brown people to grow their own food, are we even understanding how that's going to increase their water bill? Right? We're trying to help people plant more trees in certain communities. Well, so in Portland, for example, if you are a part of their tree program, you plant a tree in your front yard, you have to pay for it. You have to pay to water it. So for a Black community member who can't necessarily afford that, now I have to pay more for my energy bill because I can't afford to take care of the tree to give me the shade, so I don't have to use my air conditioner as much. These are the issues. They're so nuanced that people have to step back. And someone asked, are people using rain barrels? You do have to have the infrastructure to use the rain barrel. And in certain cities, the infrastructure won't allow for you to use a rain barrel because of how it is, the downspout is attached. So what this means for me is novel solutions for the problems that we're experiencing. It's going to take a both and, understanding policies as well as being innovative. What types of enterprises can come up for handling water insecurity? What types of small businesses need to emerge? What types of toilets need to be invented for no water? What are the ways in which we can change our lifestyle while understanding, adapting policies so that water can be affordable, water can be accessible, and water can be clean for every single person on the face of the earth?
You make some valid points. You make some really valid points, and I definitely want to get back to what you're talking about. But Hope, you brought up a significant point, and you said that a number of Black and brown people don't have access to water. And if you think about it, 80% of the water or the diseases that people have come from the water that we drink. So now, if you think about that on a bigger level than that, and we're talking about cancer, hypertension, even diabetes. Who is usually like going through those issues of diabetes and high blood pressure and cancer? It's normally Black and brown people. So that just tells you how it's really affecting Black and brown people on a major level. And it's important for us to know over 24 million people in America, over 10 million households in America are dealing with a lead water crisis. And some don't even have access, like the Navajo Nation, don't have access to clean running water. So we're facing so many issues. Go ahead, Kevin.
I want to give one point, and this is maybe just an analogy to give some perspective where too often we become so laser focused on what the symptom of the problem. And God bless Rotary. I love Rotary. They're a great organization, but they made it their huge initiative to end polio. Whereas polio is actually a waterborne illness. And they thought, let's get a vaccine to every single person. Whereas actually the issue of polio is by people drinking contaminated drinking water. So as opposed to spending the amount of resources to invest into sustainable water systems, which as Mila had mentioned, like the best water solution for a community is the best one that works for them. That could be a rainwater capture system, point of entry unit, a simple under point of use filter. It's a whole range of things. So that's where we're talking about innovative business models. We need, as much as we do need to look at policy, I have a little bit of a pessimistic view in that relying on government is sort of a losing strategy. So it is important to have different types of small, medium businesses, charities, enterprise to bring technology solutions in a way that makes it affordable, and partnering with the RCAPs of the world and the different local charities like National Clean Water Collective or Newark Water Coalition to actually bring that together to then offer both short-term solutions, which are like package water in the box solutions to get you through these next 6 to 24 months, and then work towards different business models that allow us to actually bring water solutions. And and it's so easy to just hey, there's lead problem, let's give out bottled water, or hey, there's polio, let's give out vaccines. Right. Actually addressing this core issue is deeper than the water technology. It goes into, as everyone talked about, why are these communities even dealing with water insecurities in the first place? Like you don't see lead crisis happening in East Lansing, Michigan, or upper middle, northern Chicago. You see it in southern Chicago.
Well, so Kevin, I'll push back on that. That's absolutely not true. right?
Okay.
So our city is over 100 years old, right? The same lead pipes that we're using on the north side, we're using on the south side. University of Chicago has lead pipes. University of Illinois has lead pipes. They kept it hush when our faucets tested positive for lead. Our schools have lead pipes. So the problem is our ability to mitigate the negative harm of lead, as well as practices and policies of the city. So for example, our pipes that go through the street are city-owned. The pipes that come from the city to your residence is yours. Now, when the city does a project and they tear up the street, it dislodges lead and it evacuates into the line. You're supposed to flush your line for 15 minutes before you drink it. The city is also legally supposed to post a notice letting every resident know that they're doing work, when they're doing work, how long they're going to be doing it, and to flush their line. Guess what happens? People don't know.
Right.
So the exposure, some people will know depending on the community, depending on how adamant the alderman is, making sure that the city is doing what they're supposed to do. Because, you know, these are jobs to people. People go to work and sometimes they do their jobs really good and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they take it seriously and sometimes they don't. So what we're seeing is not dissimilar across the city. It's simply an artifact of who can afford to mitigate it and how the strategies are shared. There are communities and homes right now that have a remedy. There's a program that the city is running where you can get free water filters. But guess what needs to happen in order for you to do it? You have to know. And who's responsible for communicating that? Decision makers, advocacy workers. But environmental issues are so hard pushed in our community. And I'm speaking from experience. Trying to get people to understand water or land when there are these other pressing issues that are taking priority, trying to get people to understand water shutoffs in the midst of the protest is difficult because people are looking at it as this is more important than this. When we're actually saying lead is a part of the issue with criminality. Like we haven't even connected the dots for how lead poisoning alters your brain and reduces empathy, reduces your ability to control yourself, is actually correlated to criminality. We're not even asking the questions about the brothers and sisters that are in Cook County that are from the South and West Side. How many of them actually are going to test positive for lead poisoning? And if they've been poisoned by lead, it wasn't because they did it. It's because the system was set up to not protect them.
You're right.
Mala, thank you so much for bringing that up about lead and associating with committing crimes and not being able to, to act accordingly. That is something that a lot of people don't know. We had a study done about lead and if we didn't do the work that we did to bring clean water, how many people in our service area would have committed more crimes just because of that. So I am very happy you brought that up. And I know that we have another person that's getting ready to speak, but I do want to let you all know one thing before I end. We help people who don't have indoor plumbing in their homes, meaning that they don't pay water bills, they don't pay any type of bill. When we build their homes and they're hooked up to the city water, they are angry that they have to pay a water bill. But they have access to water now, but they just cannot understand, why do I have to pay this bill? And we're also, we got funded, and yes, government is not the end all for everything. We did get funded from a private foundation called Springport Partners, that Springpoint Partners that are helping us to replace lead service lines in individuals' homes. If the city is replacing the lead pipes from the street to the house, we have a grant to help them replace the lead pipes in their homes so that we can eliminate this. And thank you, Annabelle, and I'll let you get to Kevin.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, don't worry about like bouncing off of someone else's question. Like,
I just wanted to say back this time.
No, that's okay. That's the whole point, is I want you guys to talk. That's totally fine. But yeah, this next question is for Kevin.
Okay.
And sorry, did you want to say something, Sarah?
I just wanted to save Kevin and say, is it Nikhil? from Chicago. Kevin had a point though, because in Lansing, they actually replaced all of the pipes. It took them 10 years. And yes, we do have antiquated water infrastructure. But in Lansing, what they did was they actually replaced all of the pipes. It took them 10 years to replace all of the pipes in Lansing. And the same thing they could have done in Flint, they didn't do because they don't want to invest in a poor community. They invested tons of millions of dollars in Lansing because it's the state's capital and they wanted to support it. So Kevin, it may have not been in Chicago, but he has a valid point in saying that they're going to invest where there's gentrification happening and where there's a, mostly affluent people living, but not in poor and Black and brown communities. And so we have to look at sustainable solutions or midterm sustainable solutions that we can implement, like and model business models that Kevin and I have been working on, like actual water technology that can remedy those situations until they look to change out the old infrastructure that's been there for so long. So sorry about that. I wanted to just make a point because he was driving at home. So I thank you for that.
No,
And I
both of them were valid. Where I mean, the easiest is let's replace all the pipes, but then also then it's how do you do the proper mitigation tactics, and are you following the best procedures, and in a lot of it getting the best education on how to rinse your pipes, and what is the difference between the distribution pipes and service lines, and then are you making sure, like in Flint, are you not cutting any corners and making sure that you're putting the proper corrosion inhibitors in there? And that's the thing with this whole conversation. It's not just one thing. None of this is one thing. It's complicated. And then now it's that's obviously trying to get to the problem, but then now also talking about the way forward and different solutions that we can bring.
Hope, did you want to add something? I thought you wanted to.
I was trying to say Kevin gave the RCAP a shout out. And so I want to say, if you all, this group, I hope that we can stay connected, because it sounds like you all are doing a lot of great things. And I definitely would like to see us working alongside you when it comes to water and equality and other issues that we need to fight for.
Sounds great.
And thank you, Annabelle.
You have to thank you guys.
We're always passionate people, man. We're passionate about this stuff.
Awesome. I love it. So yeah, this next question is for Kevin. It's a little different than the last one, but it's kind of related to Wristponsible and what you guys do. You guys work with artisans from all over the world, from Nepal, Thailand, Greece, Kenya. So from your experiences with global water insecurity, what sort of systemic inequalities influence water security abroad?
I mean, the hard thing about that question is that it's different in every single country, from Rwanda to Peru to Chile to North America to South America. It's all extremely different. And even from Flint to Newark, the problems may appear on the surface to be similar, but they're very different in terms of how they're ultimately dealing with the problem. And I think, let's say, for example, in Nepal, I mean, we were dealing with an earthquake that happened, and you're talking about how to rebuild hospitals and how to rebuild different schools. And then again, how is it prioritized? A lot of times you maybe don't have the centralized infrastructure and centralized government to actually take dollars and put it and prioritize in a way. I mean, we talk about corruption in America. There's corruption in every single country, and it is just a matter of how are they taxing, how are they reprioritizing and reinvesting dollars. And that's where it's just a hard question because it's so different everywhere. I think the decision or the thinking process that has been common across a lot of speakers is, let's not try and shove a square peg down a circle hole, and let's instead, you really have to work to understand the problem. And I think once you actually can understand the problem, then that's what we've done, is work with local organizations, whether it's churches or local charities that actually understand the different, let's say in Tanzania, they work with chiefdoms, and the local chief of the community we worked in Shinyanga, where we install the solar wind powered water treatment system in the community center. We had to understand their local needs. And then even still, I think Hope, you talked about, once you get clean water, it's like, wait, I have to pay for it. And people are just used to not paying for dirty water and just staying sick. So the thought of giving them safe water and charging them is just like not even in their vocabulary. And so that's where I think one of the biggest things is education of people on how to, like, how do you get diarrhea? Well, it's from drinking water that has high levels of coliform bacteria in it. And it's like, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, it's from some of the feces that came from the cow that was in the same water. And it's like, trying to make those correlations may seem easy for people that understand it, but frankly, if you've never known why you're having constant diarrhea, it's hard to understand that now drinking clean water is going to make you not sick anymore. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question. I could go into depth about Rwanda and Peru and Chile, these different countries we've done it in, but the only way we've been successful is working with local people on the ground that understand the core problem. And even for example, once I think Amelia, you mentioned that you're doing a lot with food security. I went into Navajo Nation attempting to do a water treatment project, and it turns out they had a bigger need for food. And so we helped build permaculture farms, and we actually helped implement 3 different acres of permaculture farms that's helped provide jobs and training. And so even though water may seem like obviously it's something you need to drink, food is intricately tied to that discussion too. And especially when you're dealing with food deserts and people have to drive over 200 miles to a grocery store. And you ask, well, why does Navajo Nation have the highest level of diabetes in the country? It's like, well, when all you have is 7-Eleven, McDonald's to eat, and you don't have access to high level nutrition, it's pretty easy to understand that. That's where I think there's so many things here, but from understanding the problem and working with the right partners and helping with educating people what the problems and solutions are is the best path forward. And I'd love to know from the other speakers of what your thoughts are on that, and whether from the question or my little rant here, if any of that makes sense or sparked the thought.
It has sparked a thought with me, Kevin, because I look into food, and it speaks to that about eating food and staying away from convenience stores. And I just hate to say that at my age, I never made the correlation between how food helps to heal us, how food helps to protect us. And the highest amount or cause of diabetes is the food that we're eating at the convenience stores. But that's what people can afford. It's right across the street. It's convenient. They don't have a grocery store. They can't grow food. They don't even know how to go about to do that. And that's what we miss. We need to teach people how to grow their own food. Even if you have something in the back of, if you live in a project, grow it on the steps or somewhere outside where you can, in a little planter. But we need to teach people and talk to people about that the food that they're eating is actually killing them. So that book has been a really good book. I'm in a part of my James Madison University book club, and that was our book to read for the month. And I'm very happy that I ran across it, because at first when I saw the title, I said, this is so silly. But then it really resonated with me. And you can tie food and water together, because you need the water to grow the food. So this is a great, segue to that.
Yeah, I definitely one of the things that I've been working on recently is to tie in the mutual aid groups into community gardens, because it's like we're doing this service, but we're going to like ShopRite and we're going to these big grocery stores when we can be getting fresh produce grown in our own city and just make it really sustainable. One of the things, especially this quarantine and this pandemic, has taught me is like, how do you teach people to become self-sustainable, right? And if we can really do that on these real simple things, because let me tell you something, I've never grown anything before COVID, and I'm out here growing tomatoes. I'm a whole farmer now. And I think and what I like to say all the time is, listen, it's really simple. And if I can do it, I can teach you to do it. And like, let's make this again, revolutionary, right? Because people growing their own food in an apartment building in Newark, like some people can't really wrap their minds around that idea, but once you show them it's possible, then it's like anything is possible from there.
So again, like everybody's points are absolutely valid. And we have programs, projects, organizations that are looking to help support food sovereignty and make some of these connections for people. And as someone who's worked in food systems and seeing how separate, things are, food is connected to air, it's connected to soil, it's connected to water. So inherently, it puts us in a position to be hyper aware of the quality, accessibility, and the cost of those resources in order to grow. As far as Kevin, you kind of asked what struck a chord with us. Strategic partnering is extremely important because who's at the table is going to change the approach, is going to change the context. And I'll share a story about how it is solving a problem for a Black community or a low-income community can actually be a bit mindless, even if we're not aware of some of the intersecting issues. So I went to a food council meeting. They created a garden for a community project. It was mostly mothers, single mothers, who also, they made it a point to make it clear that these women worked about 2 jobs. And they said, yeah, and now they get to grow their own food. I just started counting the hours. I don't know if you've ever grown anything, but one, it takes time, it takes care, it takes resources, and you have to invest into it. So I said, hey, when do these women rest? So there is something called a rest desert. And a Black person has to sell more of their, I keep saying them, us, we have to sell more of our time to make the same amount of money. So what our white counterpart can do in 40 hours, we have to do in 70. So add another job for me, that doesn't necessarily help me. It looks like it helps me, but it doesn't. So people had to step back and say, we didn't think about that. And we do have to consider what are the issues, the same in the environmental movement. We want Black people and brown people to go outside. Nobody's thought to say, is it safe for Black and brown bodies to be in nature alone? Right? You have environmental big greens now being very aware that they cannot be silent while they invite us to go kayaking and engage with trees. If they don't stand up for us and say, hey, we're not about racism and we're also holding people accountable. What happened here in Chicago last year with the Latina that was on Forest Preserve District and the white officer protected the white man verbally accosting her, the Black young man that was almost drowned by 2 white family members at an Illinois state park, Black family members being called, the N-word at Oak Street Beach just 3 years ago, right? People don't see that when we create a solution for a Black person, that there are these other issues that start to emerge. So with food, now we're talking about the house or the infrastructure has to be sound in order for people to have food. People have to have access to their rooftop. People have to have access to a space in the back. So policies at the local level, allowing people to live this sustainable life. And that's the other part of helping people understand how to advocate for themselves. Because if I want to grow food in my apartment, I can't because there's no sun, but I have a rooftop. But my management company doesn't value urban farming. Right? So what is the trade-off? Is there a relationship with the local park district? Can I work with the local church? What's the environmental mutual aid approach, to use Anthony's kind of paradigm, where if we don't have space to do, can we reallocate it in different ways so people can get those resources?
If I may, I just want to, I dropped offline. But to talk about advocacy, there's another part of advocacy that Black and brown people don't really partake in, and that's the legal side of things. So we're all going through struggles, but we either don't have the resources to pay for legal support, or we just don't know. And so one of our partners is the actor Hill Harper in Flint, Michigan. We've been focused on hosting Zoom webinars that focus on the legal side of it, but also talking about solutions for the Flint water crisis. And one of the things that we're finding is people just don't know. They're not educated, or they're scared, or they've been sort of told not to do it because something bad will happen to them, or there's going to be a cost to it. And a lot of these cases, these legal lawsuits that are happening, especially in Flint, you don't have to pay for it. And that's one of the things we're educating people about. But we've got to start in our communities, we have to start suing people and hold them accountable on the legal side so that we can also get money and remedy so that we can start to rebuild our communities and even our families on an individual basis, because there's a thing called the mass tort lawsuit where it allows people to seek you know, or place a claim based on their personal and individual situation, whereas a class action lumps people in a sum. And into a group, excuse me. But yet we've got to be talking about that as well. And all of these things work simultaneously, but we definitely have to talk about that piece as well.
So when it wasn't until I got into graduate school that I understood the words that really matter are the policies that we pen. And I had never felt so powerful than when I helped write House Bill 1438, which is our cannabis act. And that's when it clicked for me. Oh, so this is how you change the world, right? But then you have to have the ideas, you have to have the network, you have to write the legislation, and then you have to shop and lobby the legislation around. That did not click for me until in my 30s. But then, you know, trying to conceptualize this for the environment is an uphill battle, simply because natural history is not taught in our educational school systems. I have children here in Chicago that believe Lake Michigan is an ocean. That's a problem. I have adults believing that they're pumping oil from Lake Michigan when that is our pumping station. You have people who are homeowners that don't understand where their water comes from. They have no clue about how the city, the living system actually functions. And what stands in the gap are our businesses. So we have homeowners, residents that kind of are actors and have their own individual agency. But I do realize that enterprise, private businesses, they're the ones that offer the products and provide the services to residents and to other businesses. So when I think about allies and partners and who it makes sense to also educate, it is thinking about our plumbing association, building relationships with local developers, building relationships with local landscapers and people who work in lawn services, because these are the people that provide the most direct water services to residents. With them promoting sustainable efforts or also advocating or supporting in some way, that will help move this along. But working at the individual level, I've acknowledged in the environmental world for Black people, doesn't necessarily work. I used to sit on a board for the Alliance for the Great Lakes. They focus on Great Lakes issues and they wanted to direct their awareness to the Black community. And I said, well, you're gonna have to focus on fresh water. They said, we don't really focus on fresh water, we focus on the Great Lakes. I said, well, what goes through the pipes? Lake Michigan water. Well, there you go. And the stunning part was them asking, who do we partner with? And I said, well, hold on to your horses, because there's only one Black nonprofit that focuses on water and they focus on recreation, and that's Fishing Buddies. Fishing Buddies closed their doors about 4 years ago. So the absence of a water-centered Black organization creates a gap. There's not anyone that can translate and bring the alliance into the community. So what we're also up against is trying to understand who strategically to partner with in Black and brown communities to translate or to understand what water issues are priorities for various communities. Because from a Hyde Park perspective and someone who is a water advocate, I believe the priorities are here. Someone else who's further away from Lake Michigan, who might have a closer relationship with the Calumet River, believes that the priorities should be on fishing and recreation. So it's important for us to partner strategically, to understand that network landscape, and to develop projects around those coalitions that meet the immediate needs of the community, but that tie into the broader framework of water equity for the city and for the region as well.
I definitely have to, I resonate, especially with the strategic partnership part, and also say to everyone, be open, because you'll never, like, we're the Newark Water Coalition, and one of the partnerships I talk about all the time is always the women tampon company. And you were like, what's the connection there? And it was like, hey, they just wanted to give us stuff, and we knew people were spending money on buying cases of water. So what are they not buying? Where is this money coming from? And then people were like, well, I'm like, I don't care. They're telling me they have 15,000 pads. Let's give them out. And this is for women of color. Like, and this is the Newark Water Coalition doing it. And I was like, I don't care. I just want to give these resources out. And now that partnership has opened up a lot of doors to different people that we never thought would one, connect with us, one, do the work with us, and allow us to plug into their networks. And that's what I really like about the partnerships across the board is like, you know, our network is one thing, but you bring on an entirely different network when you partner with an organization. And that strength, that coalition building is something that I'm trying to really hammer home during the age of COVID.
That's a huge point. That's one of the, how we actually started when we started this, you know, we brought together about 18 different organizations across the United States to bring support to Flint. And, you know, we were able to give the residents over 10,000 bottles of water, wipes, sanitary napkins, Pampers. We even gave them shoes, and that was our first event on City Hall in Flint. So it's important. But I definitely want to talk about that legal side of it. I think yes, we partner with contractors in the city. We partner with all of those other people, but we always are afraid to talk about like how we have to really like legally hold people accountable. I want to get back to that because I'm so inspired by it. You know, one of our partners is Napoli Skolnick. They actually developed the emergency relief, the 9/11 emergency relief fund for the victims, and they are the biggest and the top law firm in the United States that focuses on relief for people that are going through environmental racism and injustices. And so it's important that when I learned about the differences and the fact that, and even speaking when Hill spoke with an actuary scientist, and they talked about how Black and brown people, the reason why we go through this is because they know we won't sue. They know we won't get involved in any legal matters. And that's why we keep having to go through this. So I think if you hold them accountable on the legal end of it, they'll know. And if we start standing up for things like that matter to us as a group, as a collective, they'll think twice about attacking us. And so just to give you an example with how the legal side of things really work, Larry Nassar, right? You know, it was a really bad thing that happened. And I'm not comparing anything, but I'm just talking about when we show up, we can make a difference. So 332 women were part of this case, and 90% or almost 90% of the women came forward. And what ended up happening was those about 332 women got $500 million settlement. 425 million went to them, and 75 million was set aside. But that's because they came forward. So if we can start if we can go and take these cases to court and make, and file to get support and claim our harms, then we can actually take that funding, whether it be on an individual level or a collective level, and invest back into our communities. But that's another way that we can actually start to really bring funding to our people and not always have to deal with this, because if we continue to not hold them accountable on the legal side, they'll continue to give us bull. That's what I'm seeing. It's playing out. It's playing out. Mm-hmm.
Completely agree with you. And the consequence of systemic injustice and systemic racism is how it is that ends up extracting resources for how the justice system works with Black people. So drawing out litigation, making it very difficult for us to file cases, makes people feel as though democracy does not work for us. But there are absolute examples of us winning. And that's been I see my homegirl Mel. Hey Mel, I'm sorry. I just saw a familiar face.
Yeah.
See my friends. And I fully support environmental litigation and holding our agencies responsible for who causes us harm. So when the EPA doesn't do what they're supposed to do, when your local municipality doesn't enforce ordinances or gives people the weakest penalties, that's a problem. So we have to activate that on every single level, every opportunity we have. For example, here in Chicago on Easter, the community of Little Village experienced one of the most heinous acts ever. They closed down the Crawford coal plant and it's transitioning into another facility. And on Easter Day during COVID, they basically blew it up. This huge dust plume, evacuated and went over the community. I'm not quite sure if the punishment fit the what's the word I'm looking for?
What they received in return and the compensation?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How the company was held accountable does
No,
not match the harm that was
They got a
received.
slap on the
got
wrist.
it.
They got a slap on the wrist. Now, this is an environmental justice community. So for me, it's like, what don't you understand, elected officials, that this is unacceptable, that this community fought for a decade or more to get rid of a pollution or a polluting industry. And then the person that comes in who you thought was going to be a good industrial neighbor, which, you know, I'll give you $1,000 if you can show me a good industrial neighbor, that they were going to do right by this community. And who gets to do that in our city? I do not understand how our own elected officials have the opportunity to hold people fully accountable so that we can get financial reparations, and that is lost income. Maybe it's going into somebody's, you know, pocket, but I don't understand how we're losing this fight even when we have laws to protect us.
A lot of times what happens is when you're doing these law cases, you're actually suing the city and the state. And so when they hear that, they don't want to be involved. But in the case of Flint, which is interesting, the mayor, the current mayor, he is aware of that and he knows, and he actually believes, you know, I knew him before he became mayor, and now he believes that the residents are due what they deserve, and he knows that there is a, you know, that the city is going to be held accountable, but that's how you get the money out. They've budgeted those resources to pay for things like that. They have insurance to cover those things. So it's important that, you know, people know the ins and outs of, but I'm learning. Someone else wanted to say something. I'm sorry, because I feel like I'm talking.
Hi, my name is Melanie. I've done like open space and water issues. I've been in the environmental sector for about 20 years now. But the organization I used to work for is Friends of the Parks. And we ended up suing the city of Chicago about the George Lucas Museum on the waterfront. Our case was in federal court. And a lot of times, like, we had to have like a plaintiff who was we basically had a plaintiff who was personally wealthy and wasn't susceptible to pressure. You know, like, I'm from Chicago, so it's just like, if a person of color is going to court to sue the city of Chicago, they would totally pressure them and, you know, send people after them to intimidate them and that type of thing. So my thing is, who would be a person that would feel comfortable enough suing that entity where they wouldn't be susceptible to that pressure, whether it's a person of the cloth or someone where they are not going to be susceptible to that type of pressure. So you have to have a very good plaintiff, that's credible in the community, that they can't start spreading and smearing, you know, this person is, you know how they throw the toxic waste on the people. And it's a non-issue, just like when a woman accuses of rape. It's a non-issue. We're here about rape, but you want to talk about some old unrelated stuff to distract. And so you really have to have somebody with a very good track record, a good voting record, a person who will not be susceptible, who doesn't care. And it's hard to find that in our community, because if it's a business owner, they may retaliate against that business. If it, you know, and we don't have that many people that are individually and personally wealthy where they don't care. Their money is not tied to a job or a person or something. So you really have to work hard to find a plaintiff, or plaintiffs plural, that would not be susceptible to that pressure. When I was at Friends, we were dealing with stuff with Obama Library. We had people from Rom's office calling us, pulling funding from REI from a grant that we had gotten, you know, but they didn't care. And so I'm on the phone like, somebody from REI talking about you need to pull the case, and, you know, and I know pressure, you know, that's shady when they call, hey, I'm so-and-so, and he just so happened to mention like, I used to be affiliated with Friends, and I'm from REI, like, you know, that's one of your funders. Like, bitch, yes, I know that's one of our fucking funders. Like, you know, but you have, I'm sorry, I like the curse, sorry. So it's just like, you have to have somebody who's like unflappable, who's not gonna really be susceptible to the pressure, who's been prepped to understand that you may be in the grocery store, somebody may roll up on you. Another thing I like to do is mess with your kids, that type of thing. So you have to really be ready to be insulated from it, or someone who doesn't care and they're about that life and they don't, you know, and so it's not going to be an issue. But as far as our community, you're already dealing with COVID. And then it's like, you know, a lot of people aren't working, and to have someone to stand firm and say, yeah, let's sue them. You know,
so check it. You make a valid point though, because it's so real what you're saying. But check it out. So what they've done in Flint, and this is a brilliant idea, a brother by the name of Reggie Davidson. He's known in the community. He's a community activist. He set up a Flint intake center that's connected to the law firm. So he could do the work on the ground. People trust him. People trust his word. They know his track record. And what he does is he educates the public, but he also, you know, he's a paralegal. So he's able to deal with the legal side of it all. And he definitely, you know, he communicates with the lawyers. In fact, we had a lawyer on the Zoom call. But if you can bridge the gap with a person like a Reggie in Chicago, set up a center that is an affiliate of the law firm, and have them do the groundwork, because you know, also the law firm is because of ethical reasons they can only do but so much. So if you have a middle guy that's a Reggie Davidson that's on the ground, that knows the people, that is a paralegal, you know, but he's not so connected with the law part. You know, he is, but you know what I'm saying? He's on the ground. And so that's a model that we can use in our communities so that we can bridge the gap between the community members that are afraid of the law firms and also the law firms, right? And so the law firms, in fact, the owner, he's like, hey, how's everything going? He's that connected, and he wants to know, and he wants to see change, but he's limited in what he can do. But a Reggie Davidson, if you set that up in Chicago, can be the middle person that can get to the people, which is necessary.
So I just wanted to lift up, when people ask me to talk about the environment and higher education, I often will end up in front of, you know, pre-law students. So when I communicate the importance of diversity in STEM, or the importance of diversity in natural resources, it's literally in every single sector. In the law club, in the environmental law club, there was one African American, right? So it's also required of us to help professionals understand how to serve in light of these environmental crises.
Yes.
I get that we want to make money. I totally get that we go to medical school, you know, we go to law school, and we want these successful, you know, professions, but these gifts and talents can be used to serve the greater public and a greater good. So you got my head, you know, some ideas churning for what's the ask of the Black and brown legal community. What are we willing to do as water people or as environmental people to help support them, to turn their attention to what it is the needs are? Because that is a pain point nobody wants to litigate. People can't afford, right? What are the opportunities? What are the opportunities for local institutes and coalitions? So now I'm like, what are the novel partnerships that can happen with, you know, law students to even help them understand? It's like people tell you, don't go into the environment, there's no money, right? As a Black girl interested in science, they push you into medical school. I got to medical school and I was like, I don't like this. And here I am as an ecologist connecting the health of the environment to the health of people, educating Chicago's medical students, right? Like, I don't have to be in medicine to serve a human body. You know, I don't have to be in law to work on policy. I was very close to going to doing a joint degree program. I really should have. But I stand in the gap between science and policy so I can translate between both. So there's a place for all of our Black and brown professionals standing in the gap, interdisciplinarily. Especially, we desperately need us in water. When I threw that conference, you all, I was looking for a Black person, a scholar, and that was very specific. We only make up 3% or 6% of tenure track faculty members in America. And the name that kept coming up was Mia Marshall. I was furious. I was like, I can't throw the conference and speak. So now my job is to help curate the next generation to identify life is not all about money. And
That's
these
right.
resources, you can use your gifts and talents. When you love what you do, money will come.
That's
but our
right.
cities require us to stand up professionally and personally.
We'll also talk about implicit bias because I have a background in water and I came to Chicago to get a job in water and I kept applying and they wouldn't hire me. In NRDC, Karen, my alum, I see you across the table at these events. You're at NRDC. I've applied several times, but they wouldn't hire me. And I had the skill set. I went to the University of Chicago. It's literally implicit bias where they won't hire you. And it's not, so don't say, and Mila, don't even say we're not interested. We can't even get through the door. You know?
Well, you know,
we do
my
have the
only,
skills.
in understanding Blacks in science, when you look at the numbers, first of all, the highest degree for African Americans is a bachelor's. 80% of us stop at bachelor's. So even the mismatch between setting the educational attainment for educational needs for jobs, they place it so high, knowing that it's going to be a small applicant pool of people of color applying for that job. The next thing is what we're in competition with, right? So if people can get a job that pays more money, or it is more, when I say I'm doctor, they say, oh, what kind of medicine? I'm like, no, like a professor. They're like, what is this, right? So there's also a push by people's parents to pursue particular degrees. So not to say that we're not interested, it's trying to help encourage people to take their interest in science and put it into fields where we are absent. And to your point, yes, like the water department, like I'm gonna need to know like the diversity of the water department as people retire. Like we want 30% of those jobs to go to Black and brown people in the city, and that's just it. You know, if our water department does not reflect what we look like, you know, you can have, you know, a figurehead, that's fine, but the people who work every day across, whether it's in the water department or MWRD, we do want those jobs.
Yeah.
Saber says, I am inspired. Good.
She is the co-founder of the Newark Water Coalition, by the way.
Nice, nice.
Well, I just want to highlight that I'm sure all of you are seeing the chat, and there's a bunch of amazing resources in it. And after this panel, we'll make sure to put as much as we can from this chat on our website so people can access it. There's a book and a documentary and all sorts of stuff. So if you missed it, it'll be on the website later. And so I'll ask 2 more questions because there's so much to talk about. It's definitely not enough. But so this next one, anyone can answer, and it's kind of relating to education. So this is from a researcher, Jessica Wedgeworth. I don't know if you know who that is. But so small community water systems are more likely to violate federal water quality standards. And they are associated with more disease outbreaks. Many of the systems serve economically disadvantaged communities. How does racism and/or classism in small rural communities impact water security?
Kevin, I've been talking a lot, so I want to allow someone else to talk. Hope if you want to answer.
Tee it up, and then I'll follow you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I would say just like the example I gave before of the community that we've helped for decades. I mean, they have been advocating, and it starts that they had a community leader that was just pushing, not only for water, but for wastewater. They did give the community wastewater, but they did not, you know, and would not give them access to the water because of class. They're not going to pay their bills. Or it's going to cost us too much money to install the pipes and to run the lines out to that community. But they did run a line 1 mile short of a Black community to a white community. They were 1 mile away, but they ran it to a white community. So how can you tell us that you don't want to run the water lines because it's going to cost too much? Because the class and the assumption is that the white community is going to pay, but the Black community is not going to. And so,
they don't have the resources.
Right, they don't have resources, and we see that a lot in our rural communities. I mean, in the state of Maryland, they build what are called islands, where they will build water all around and leave these islands of minority communities without water. I just cannot, you know, see and imagine that is what we're seeing and living with here in our country. Everyone in this country should have access to clean drinking water. No one in this country should not. And if you're intentional and going to build it for the whole community, just not certain sections of it.
I think definitely this, this revolt, if you will, this uprising that's happening across the country, this is now the time to capitalize off of what's happening and get people involved. So if we can build committees and, be communicating like this on a regular basis about needs of each community, I think it's going to be key for us to move this along. Because once this becomes dormant again, people are not going to be as energized to get it done. So right now is the time to seize so we can get get moving on it. And Kevin, you wanted to add, I'm sorry.
I think a big part of this too is that I agree water is a human right, and water needs to be something that is provided and we need to advocate for. But it's important that we need to continue to think creatively about this, and that there is a cost to getting water from source to home. And unfortunately, there's been lawmakers and policies that has caused this to go in disarray and have created a lot of these different systematic, terrible injustices that exist. But moving forward, there's still a matter of, okay, we need to fix this problem. How do we influence policy to get more money to replace pipes? How do we create business models that can be subsidized by the Ford Foundation? How do we find ways to get $500,000 grants to do pilot programs? And I think it's important. It's easy to point the finger, and we know there's a lot of stuff that are, and I believe it was Melanie, you dropping the F-bomb. I'll drop one too. There's a lot of fucked up shit. And I love Gary Vee. You should follow him out.
Yeah, Gary!
We need to be thinking about sustainable business models, because no matter what, we need to find ways to find subsidies, find grants, find ways to influence policies, top down, bottom up. And there's no bad idea. And I think, I don't even know what the question was earlier, but I think just back to it takes a village here. Yes. And I want to just acknowledge this. Like, I grew up in a privileged white community in Los Angeles and lived in a bubble that didn't experience any of this until I actually moved to the Midwest and moved to Chicago and experienced some of this, and talking to mothers in Flint that had given their children lead water without knowing it. Like, that's the kind of stuff that wakes you up. And that's where I think this type of local advocacy helps build the empathy, because I know I'll never understand, but I can at least do my best to try to understand. And the best type of action in my mind, or the best way to respond, is with your actions. So if you want to help, there's a lot of amazing organizations on this call that need help. And you don't have to give your money. You can give your time, as we saw with the amazing outpouring support with recent with driving lobbyists on everything that happened with George Floyd and everything we're doing with Breonna Taylor. You can do things with your time and your effort and your hustle and your social media accounts and your friends. So don't feel like just because maybe you work in auditing for someone else that you can't do anything. Like, anyone can make a difference, and there's a lot of orgs here that can really help. And I encourage everyone to reach out to all the speakers on this call to find ways to get involved.
Even what I was showing, excellent point, Kevin, and really quick, what I was showing is a piece of art that actually a Canadian artist sent to us, because we have a project called the Art for Flint. We're looking to bridge the gap. We always think about innovative ideas to bring people forward and bridge the gap, and how do we get young folks involved? And so Art for Flint is that program, that campaign that allows artists to lend a hand with their art. And so it also, it creates camaraderie between the community. And now I got this friend in Canada. It also helps us to enlarge our to increase our network. And so Melissa is like a stone cold advocate now, and she's like posting stuff and our legal stuff, and she's really engaged. And so if we can create campaigns like this, also, it definitely is that that tool that we can use to create more awareness, but also raise the funding that we need for those sustainable, models that we're looking to work on to implement real solutions into communities.
So I just wanted to comment, on the question about rural and water quality, and if it was dealing with race and class. I'm always careful to focus specifically on urban water issues and especially urban environmental justice and environmental injustice towards African Americans is nuanced. And every community and every ethnic group has a very different relationship with environmental harms and the patterns and processes that create environmental harms. And it's easy to focus on big cities, but Illinois is not Chicago. And as somebody who was raised in Chicago, that was an eye-opener. I saw a film called Raising Bertie, right? And it was the reality of this segregated town. And it really had me think about, how am I an ally for people who are water insecure, period, right? It doesn't matter your race, but let me understand the demographics of who has water insecurity, why, and where. So our rural towns, for example, very small, are dealing with nitrates in their water because they're close to farmland, right? So understanding that our water system and water infrastructure and water issues change geographically. And there are small communities that might be 97% white, like Maystown, Illinois, 97% white. Now, granted, it's only 157 people who live in that town, but the income is very low. Yet they're not any less important than the mother that's suffering with her child, you know, making a bottle of formula with lead. We do have to find a way to help people understand it's not either or. It's not urban versus rural, but understanding the chain of water issues, how agriculture and our agricultural practices contribute to poor quality of water for our rural lands, our choice of infrastructure, how the city knew what lead would do. They knew that. Chicago knew prior to putting the pipes in that lead coating was going to cause a problem. So what was the solution? The solution, they had already purchased them, right? So if you have a product that you already paid for, you're not going to count it as a loss. You're going to try and amend it. So what do? We figured out a way to keep the pipes and put an additive in there. These pipes are 100 years old. Our infrastructure issues are significant. They're not the same issues that rural Illinois has. So class has a huge part to do with individuals not being able to advocate against larger coalitions and people who don't want to change their practices. This all boils down to, what is our problem with evolving the way that we live so that it doesn't hurt the environment and doesn't hurt people? I do not understand how we are resistant to acknowledging the ways that we work cause harm, and we can figure out how to move forward in a more sustainable way. If we do not stop focusing on profits, we're going to displace the problem. I don't want to displace water issues from urban Black communities to poor rural white communities. I need for everybody to have clean drinking water, period, point blank. I need all food to have access to clean drinking water. I want the water that comes from the freaking sky to not be toxic, because we haven't even talked about that. We're just talking about the water that comes through the line, right? Like, we're not even talking about acid rain and particulate matter and all of the stuff that drops out on us. We haven't even focused on that, which comes from other countries. It comes from manufacturing, from things that we want to buy because people are selling us cheap stuff made with cheap labor. It is so much bigger than one resource. It requires all of us to ask ourselves, why are we making our decisions? Why are we purchasing this? Why are we traveling here? Why are we investing in this? Why are we voting for this person? To realize that our elected officials are sitting on these committees, having never worked in natural resource management ever in their life. And they're controlling millions of dollars for the health and safety of our economy and our people, blows my mind. But
situation in Newark.
that's a call for us as environmental professionals. And people keep asking me, when you run for office? I don't know. I don't know, but I do realize that I probably have to in order to be present. You know, like that's it. You know, like
I'm need to. Yep.
We all, the science. So what's the organization? Mel, you probably know it.
I heard the squad is recruiting new members.
It's not. You said who?
I heard the squad is recruiting new members.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, all right. It's a nonprofit organization that helps scientists communicate to policymakers, but then also kind of makes it easy for you to think about possibly running for office. Our perspective as scientists, now I got to think of it. It's like on the tip of my tongue. Okay, Mila for president, maybe president of MWRD.
Girls,
what's interesting, your last point is very interesting. I'm running for office now, and what I think that it does is that radical, dope people that do the work tend not to run for office because we're busy doing the work. But what I've found, and this is my second time around, is that it's given me such a bigger platform to talk about the shit I want to talk about. And that's what, so win, lose, whatever, you start creating such a network that people just want to listen to you. People want to hear what you have to say. They trust what you have to say. And so they're willing to hear your side of everything. And what you really just package so well is, again, all of these struggles are so interconnected. Yeah. And so there is no right way to pick up trash, right? You just pick trash up. Just do the work.
If you ever need anything, Anthony, if you need any information, if you need a one-pager, I got you. Just shoot me an email. Doesn't matter what scale, what city. Consider me your environmental consultant.
Oh, that's dope. I like that.
That's huge.
Anthony, what are you running for?
So I'm running for Essex County Freeholder, and I'm a big budget guy, right? So looking at the numbers, I always tell people that's where people put their priority at, right? Yeah. And so one of the quickest things is, like, we spent $14.5 million on a garage, but our public assistant our public assistant funding was $3 million. How does that make any sense? How does that make any sense? And especially now, right, where people need public assistance. Right. We spent more money on a garage. And so
new garage that they're building there, you mean?
Yeah. And so again, these are the small things that really, again, if we're not the ones talking about it, chances are you'll never hear about it.
Well, Anthony, you definitely have my vote. I don't live in Newark, but so this has been great, but I will wrap it up with this last question that, well, we got a lot of questions from our registrants, but this kind of sums up what at least half of them said. This is from Jessica S. Besides donating, what are other ways we can help communities that are water insecure if we do not live in that community or are not able to physically volunteer?
Building awareness is the biggest thing. You know, the fact that, you know, when you, and social media is that tool that we can use, everyone can use, I mean, within reason, can use it to galvanize people to learn about a certain, you know, issue that's happening in the community, especially in Flint, and, you know, and in Newark and other places. But like, social media is great, but definitely helping us share, you know, following us on our pages, and helping us build more awareness, volunteering your time, like Kevin talked about. If it's coming to events, if you live in the community or if you want to come visit, and also, you know, participating in art campaigns like the one that we're working on right now, and any other campaign. But if you don't have the funding, definitely helping to build resource or building awareness is a big thing, a big part of it.
I think about learning how to, you know, be a good ally in different ways, and also, you know, the difference between being an ally and an accomplice. If you're not a part of the community that is suffering from the injustice, like, and you're far away and you can't give money. I also think about being on professional boards and holding certain perspectives and sharing that information. I think about if you are present or participating in an organization that establishes grants and anything relative to money, that you lift up some priority areas that might be non-traditional. I also think about working in different ways, like if you are a person of faith, maybe your church, for example, is choosing to work or partner with or send money or, you know, good vibes and prayer. You know, sometimes all we can do is wish people well. And I mean, I am a woman who believes in good energy, and simply affirming that what you do and how you live your life will have a level of awareness of do no harm. There may be a community adjacent to you that you're not sure is experiencing water insecurity. If you start to look, you might be able to throw a rock and hit one. Like literally, they're everywhere. And from there, they will communicate to you their needs, and they will give you specific asks. So it's also be open to listening, be open to being aware, and look around your immediate area for communities that might not look like us, right? They might be white. They might also be immigrants. They might be rural. They might be, farmers, right? There's communities that suffer from water insecurity that are, commercial, residential. So, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Imani says undocumented community is affected by water issues. That was from Imani.
The other piece of that is really quick is just the education piece. So one of the groups that we're working with, they wanted to, start some sort of curriculum in a school so that we can educate the kids, because kids talk about it, and those are the ones that are really on the ground. We saw it with the whole George Floyd situation, but to educate and maybe develop a program with kids and in school systems so that we can educate them about what's happening, and then they can actually take action through maybe a GoFundMe or different programs. I don't know, but education is a big piece too in our schools.
I would say it's everything is a resource. People and their skill sets are resources. And so oftentimes I'll say, like, you don't have to be the person on the bullhorn. You could be the person making the calls. You could be making copies. You could be stapling papers together. One of the things that I find has been very vitally important now is, like you mentioned, infographics and one-pagers, right? Graphic designers are crucial because, information gets digested in so many different ways that you just never know. I've partnered with musicians to make songs. I've partnered with artists, just to make paintings. So it's like everybody can bring their talent and we just plug them in. And so even if you're that person and you're like, well, I don't have a special skill or I don't have a talent, you contact me. I will find a way to put you to work. Like, there is nothing short. And Kevin said it, sometimes time is such an underappreciated resource. And I will take someone's time over their money every single day, because it is, we are just I am just one person, and this work takes people to win, or these battles take people to win. And so I say, just be open and just say, hey, just show up, ask. And then, the person or people, whoever at the forefront of this movement will certainly make use of you.
Definitely.
I had a few things to share. One thing is information. I was at tables that, were so far removed from the community level. So I would literally filter information because I couldn't be the face. I couldn't be out there protesting. I just slid information like, y'all might want to know that this meeting is happening this day at this time. You didn't hear from me. So that's
right.
Accomplished is sliding that information. The other thing is letters of support.
Yes.
It was so funny. I was at the Dorceta Taylor's conference, New Horizons, and the president for 350.org was there, a high member, was talking about how Black Lives Matters. And I was amused. I was like, oh, that's so cute. He's talking about how Black Lives Matters. But 350, everybody and their mama is doing a Black Lives Matter statement because 350 was being a good ally. And they were like, we believe that Black Lives Matter, press release, send, go. And so now everybody and their mama has a BLM statement. And you're looking like, really, dude? Like these same orgs that were like, we don't do equity, all have a BLM statement out right now.
Yeah.
And that's part of being a good ally. The other thing is also letters of support. It may not be your area, but if you can lend credibility to an organization with just a letter of support and say, well, we support X, Y, and Z, that can also help leverage power.
Definitely. Great points.
And also connecting people. Never underestimate the value of connecting someone. Sometimes you're not the person, but you know someone. As I talk to people, they're like, you know what? My cousin's uncle had a barbecue. And I met this person. They work in water. I'd like to introduce you. So your network is extremely valuable. Your cousin that is a graduate student in the Great Lakes focusing on fisheries, that is a resource, right? So you have to, you're open, you use what you have wisely, and you take every opportunity to engage that makes sense for you. You know, I'm always very careful with telling people to do things that deplete them of their energy. But sometimes when, you know, like just living with that level of awareness that you have something to give and understanding that you kind of have to be wise about pulling out, whether it's a contact or whether it's a letter of support, that you have all these tools in your ally toolbox, and that each individual connection is going to require the utility of a different tool.
Huge. I think you hit the nail on the head, because that's how we were able to get, just recently with this COVID crisis, 20,000 gallons of water to Flint. You know, it was through a connection of someone else, one of our funders, that said, hey, let me reach out to one of the trucking companies that I know and let me see if they could help. And they ended up donating the first shipment, which was fantastic. But it was a resource that we never had before, but because it was opened up by one of our partners, it then, you know, allowed us to do the end goal, you know, to actually complete what we set out to do, and that was get the water to Flint. So you make a valid point with that. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I say that I'm a little bit still sad to see that Flint is still having water problems. That is just on, and we're still talking about it, but it's not in the news like it was before.
Right.
And that's the point that I wanted to make when you said when this dies down. When and if this moment that we're in does die down, we all need to keep fighting. We cannot get comfortable and complacent. We need to make sure we put action. It's time to stop talking and put action. And so I'm glad, and thank you, Annabelle, for getting us together.
Yes.
I think this has been remarkable. There are great people on here, and we all need to stay in touch with one another. And I need you, Mala, on my team as well, and everyone else. Annabelle, you too, because you are a young person making change, and we all appreciate you for bringing us here in this platform.
Yes, thank you so much, Annabelle. Great panelists. Great panelists.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm just blown away by all of you. I'm so happy that you all came here today. I guess I'll just wrap it up by shamelessly self-promoting here. I'll share my screen really quick just to wrap it up. So I mentioned that everything in the chat, as well as some other things that we put together, there will be resources available after this to keep this conversation going at yeswic.com/BLM. We'll have all the contact information of all these amazing panelists, because I know a lot of people said that they wanted to communicate with them. And we'll have, there's different texts, there's different readings, there's different books. We'll add everything that you guys talked about today. There's a place where you can contact Congress about specific national bills, because I know we talked about that a little bit, because that's super important and effective. And then I also want to plug our COVID-19 relief fundraiser. Half of the organizations that are in this relief fundraiser are on this panel. So if you can go and donate, it'll go directly to people that can use it. And then also Flint specific. This is our 3rd year hosting the Run Fast for Flint 5K. This is virtual, which is a little different, but if any of you are runners, you don't have to be fast, you just have to run or walk, and all of the proceeds will be going directly to community organizations in Flint, including the National Clean Water Collective. So participating in that is a big deal. But anyway, I'll stop sharing this. You can take it, actually I'll leave it up if anyone wants to take a picture really quick of it.
Oh yeah, I want to.
But yeah, I'll just wait a sec.
Sorry.
No, you're
Annabelle, I had a suggestion. If you want to maybe like for the post, you could do the screenshot for like everybody.
Good idea.
That's in attendance. Okay.
Yeah.
And Kevin, I don't know if you spoke with Kevin, but he had to jump off, so he apologized about that.
No, that's fine. We're wrapping up anyway, so no worries. Well, thank you to Kevin, even though he's not here. But thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I'm so happy that you guys can make it. I know you guys are busy. But this was really great. Like I mentioned before, this recording will be posted on our website if anyone wants to go check it out after this. But thank you so much for our panelists, and thank you so much to our virtual audience members. We're all so lucky to have this conversation, and hopefully we can do more events like this in the future, because as you guys all mentioned, this is a conversation that needs to keep going even after the momentum of the protests and everything dies down. But I'm very honored that you all were here today. It was great to talk to you all. Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your Sunday night.
You too. Thank you, everyone, and wishing you continued success. We definitely, if you can put like together an Excel spreadsheet with all of our information, if we want to share, I think that would be great.
Yeah, we'll do. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much,
everyone. Take care.